May 7, 1945. A column of American trucks rolled out of the trees on a narrow road in western Czechoslovakia. Then the first driver hit the brakes. Not because the road was mined, not because German armor was waiting, because someone had dragged a farm wagon, 2 concrete blocks, and a shattered telephone pole across the last 800 yards to town. Behind that barricade stood 29 Waffen-SS holdouts, 2 machine guns, 4 Panzerfausts, 1 officer too young to understand defeat and too proud to admit it had already happened. The war was ending in headquarters rooms and on radio paper. But here, on this road, it still had teeth. Captain Elias Echohawk sat in the lead jeep with one hand on the dashboard and the other pressed against the radio handset. He was 31 years old, Pawnee, born in Oklahoma, and he had led Baker Company across more countries than most of his men had ever expected to see. He had watched boys turn into veterans in hedgerows. He had watched veterans freeze in the Ardennes. He had watched the Rhine swallow equipment, horses, letters, prayers, and names. Now he stared at a roadblock thrown together by men whose army was already coming apart. 800 yards. That was all that remained. 800 yards to the rail yard. 800 yards to the town square. 800 yards to a clean line on a map that would mean nothing once the surrender was signed. Behind him, his men waited in the trucks. Some had not shaved in 3 days. Some had German pistols tucked into their packs as souvenirs they no longer cared about. Some were staring at the SS barricade with the dead. Practiced calm of men who had learned exactly how fast a machine gun could change a day. A young lieutenant beside Echohawk whispered, "We can bring the guns up, sir." The 105s were already 2 bends back. The gun crews could be unlimbered in minutes. 1 order, and the barricade would disappear in dust, timber, and pieces of men. Echohawk did not answer right away. He looked at the road. He looked at the boys in his company. Then he said, "Not for 800 yards." Across the barricade, SS Lieutenant Otto Weiss paced behind the wagon with a Walther pistol on his hip. He was 22, narrow-faced, clean-shaven, and stiff with the kind of belief that only survives when reality is kept far away. His uniform was still buttoned correctly. His boots were still polished at the heel. His men were not so polished. Some wore mismatched helmets. One had a bandage wrapped around his cheek. One machine gunner looked no older than 17. But Weiss moved among them as though the Reich were not a collapsing ruin, as though a roadblock beside a Czech ditch could still be turned into a monument. By that week, German command was no longer a single voice. It was a broken set of wires. Orders were delayed, contradicted, or invented by officers who had been abandoned by the very system they were dying for. Most units wanted only to find Americans before the Soviets found them. Others kept fighting because no one had given them permission to stop. And a few, the worst few, treated the end of the war as a stage on which they could prove they had never doubted. That was what made the final hours dangerous. Not strategy, not hope, pride. The last fuel left in a dead machine. Echohawk tied a white cloth to the jeep antenna and drove forward with his interpreter, Sergeant Miller, sitting rigid beside him. The jeep rolled to a stop 20 yards from the barricade. Every American rifle behind him tracked the sandbags. Every German weapon tracked him. Echohawk climbed out slowly. His hands were open. His pistol stayed in its holster. He did not salute. He did not smile. He simply walked until the road between him and Weiss felt narrow enough to become a decision. Weiss stepped out from behind the wagon. Sergeant Miller translated as Echohawk spoke. "Your command is finished." The surrender terms are being carried through every sector. You can put down your weapons and walk out alive." Weiss stared past him at the trucks. "You are asking permission to pass." "No," Echohawk said. "I am offering you a way not to die for a road nobody will remember tomorrow." The words reached Weiss in German. His jaw tightened. "My orders are to hold this approach." "From whom?" Weiss blinked. Echohawk let the question hang. "From whom, Lieutenant?" Behind the barricade, one of the SS men shifted his boots in the dust. Weiss heard it and snapped his head back, then forced his voice steady. "An officer of Germany does not require a lecture from an American." Echohawk took one more step. "If I bring up artillery, your position lasts 5 minutes. Maybe less. You know that. Your men know that. I know it." Weiss almost smiled. "Then fire." The interpreter hesitated before translating. Echohawk's eyes did not move. Weiss raised his voice so his men could hear. "You fear blood at the finish. We do not. That is the difference between conquerors and soldiers." Echohawk looked past him, at the machine gunner with the soft face, at the man with the dirty bandage, at the hands gripping rifles because the man in front of them had given them no other way to be brave. Then he turned back to the jeep. The American lieutenant thought the order was coming. It was not. Echohawk lifted the handset and called battalion. His voice stayed level. "I need a loudspeaker truck, the German prisoner from the staff car, and 10 minutes where nobody fires unless fired on." The radio crackled. A voice asked if he wanted artillery standing by. Echohawk looked at the barricade. "Keep it standing by. Do not bring it forward." 10 minutes later, a half-track rolled up behind the lead jeep with a field loudspeaker strapped to its side. Beside it stood a captured Wehrmacht captain named Leupold, gray-faced, exhausted, and still carrying the leather document case he had surrendered with that morning. Inside were copied orders sent through what remained of German command in the sector. "Cease resistance against Western Allied forces. Withdraw from populated areas. Avoid useless destruction." The language was formal, cold, nearly meaningless in a headquarters. But on that road, in front of boys holding loaded weapons, it became something else. Proof. Echohawk did not put Leupold beside him as a shield. He put him in front of the loudspeaker where every German at the barricade could hear the accent, the rank, and the exhaustion. Leupold read the order in German. His voice cracked once, then steadied. When he finished, there was no applause, no sudden movement. Only the sound of wind moving through trees and men trying to decide which officer still owned their lives. Weiss shouted, "Traitor!" Leupold lowered the paper. "No," he said in German, "alive." That was the first crack. Echohawk stepped toward the loudspeaker. Miller translated after each line, "Listen carefully. I am not asking your lieutenant to surrender anymore." Weiss turned sharply. Echohawk kept going. "I am speaking to the men behind him." The machine gunner lifted his eyes. "You have heard the order. You have heard it from one of your own officers. If you put your weapons down now, you will be treated as prisoners." Weiss barked for silence. Echohawk raised his voice, not in anger, but with the authority of a man who had already counted the dead in his head and refused to add more. "If you fire after this, you are not defending a nation. You are killing men for an order that no longer has a command behind it." Miller translated. The words moved through the barricade slower than bullets, and deeper. Echohawk pointed to the road between them. "This ground is not honor. It is dirt. Your mothers will not know this ditch. Your fathers will not know this wagon. No child in Germany will remember that you held 800 yards for another hour." Weiss reached for his pistol. "Not all the way. Just enough. 3 American rifle bolts clicked behind Echohawk. He lifted one hand without turning. The bolts stopped. That mattered. The SS men saw it. They saw an enemy captain hold back rifles that were already hungry to fire. They saw a man with every advantage refusing to use it because their lives still had weight. The first to move was the young machine gunner. He opened the feed tray of his MG-42 and lifted the ammunition belt out with both hands. Weiss spun toward him. "You will close that weapon." The boy did not. A corporal beside him lowered his rifle. Then another. Then the man with the bandage stepped away from the wagon and set his Panzerfaust on the ground as carefully as if it were a sleeping animal. Weiss pulled his pistol halfway out. Before he could raise it, an older SS sergeant caught his wrist. The two men stared at each other over the barrel. The sergeant said one word, "Enough." The pistol dipped. It did not fall, not yet. For 3 seconds, the entire road balanced on a single hand. Then Weiss released the grip. His weapon hit the dirt. After that, the barricade lost its shape. Men came out from behind the wagon with their hands raised. The machine guns were dragged into the open. Rifles were stacked against the concrete blocks. A Panzerfaust rolled off the road and landed in the weeds. No one cheered. The Americans were too tired for celebration, and too aware of how close they had come to doing the easier thing. Echohawk ordered his men forward, not with triumph, with control. Collect the weapons, check for mines, keep the prisoners moving. A recovery truck hooked a chain to the wagon and pulled it sideways. The telephone pole scraped across the road. Dust lifted. The last obstruction slid into the ditch. 800 yards opened in front of Baker Company. The men climbed back into the trucks. As they passed the prisoners, nobody spat. Nobody laughed. Nobody offered mercy as performance. They drove through the gap with their rifles across their knees, eyes forward, alive because their captain had refused to let the dying war choose the method of its own ending. The official report was small. A roadblock cleared. 29 prisoners taken, no American casualties, no enemy dead. The army reduced it to lines because that is what armies do. But the men of Baker Company remembered the sound of that ammunition belt sliding out of the gun. They remembered the way Echohawk raised his hand and stopped his own rifles. They remembered that the final road did not open because someone had more firepower. It opened because one captain understood the difference between winning ground and spending lives. The road opened. The machine had stopped, and Captain Elias Echohawk refused to feed it one more man.